There's been renewed interest in the Y62 Nissan Patrol, not because a whole lot has changed, but because people can't get their hands on the Land Cruiser 300 series, although maybe that's deflected some attention back on this beast of a four-wheel drive that people have kind of forgotten about. Like in 2022, up till May, sales are up 117% for the Nissan Patrol. It's sold almost 3,000. Looks like it's going to sell about 7,000 units this year. And last month, it sold nearly 900 in a month. That's like the Patrol of 20 years ago. So that's really quite a big number for a vehicle like this. This is the entry-level Ti, the MY22 model, and it starts at $89,599 drive away. That seems like a lot of money, but when you think about the fact that the base model Land Cruiser GX that I tested recently with a vinyl floor and the 17-inch steel wheels and all that starts at just under 90 not on road, and that's before you start to factor in the fact that people are asking a lot more for that because they can't get one. It kind of makes this MY22 Patrol Ti here look like relatively good value. What's different about the MY22 Patrol? That can be answered in two questions here with this Ti. It is the black grille, which looks a lot better than the chintzy chrome thing it had before, and the garnish in the front guard there that now says Patrol, which makes it look a little bit more legitimate. Otherwise, it's the same car that we tested in New Zealand in early 2020, just before COVID, with this redone front end, with a few other changes here and there, mostly visual, to give this now older than a decade four-wheel drive a bit of a visual uplift and make it seem a little bit more relevant. Now, one of the reasons I reckon you should look at the Ti over the TIL, not only because it costs about $14,000 less drive away, is because at the front here it has a much simpler front bumper bar. It has a 34-degree approach angle compared to 28 in the TIL, because the TIL has all this chrome stuff down here and like a spoiler bit at the front, whereas this Ti is just relatively simple. And with the new black grille, it actually looks kind of cool. The rest of the vehicle is pretty much exactly the same. The only changes are it doesn't have a sunroof and roof rails. It has the same 18-inch alloy wheels with these pretty high-profile Bridgestone jeweler tyres, the side steps. All the rest of the stuff is kind of the same. Doesn't get an electric tailgate, and that's a bit of an issue, but other than that, this is actually a pretty good value four-wheel drive. But what we're here to test though is to see whether Nissan's beast of a four-wheel drive is as antiquated as it may seem, or whether it still has its own level of charm and appeal up against a brand new Land Cruiser. Now, just some quick basic four-wheel drive stats. The Patrol Ti's approach angle is actually 34.4. The Land Cruiser 300 series is 32, providing you don't buy the Sahara ZX, which you shouldn't. The rear is 26 departure angle versus 25 in most Land Cruiser models. The ground clearance in a Patrol is 273 millimeters versus 235 in the Land Cruiser. So it actually wins on all those little stats, but we'll see how it goes on the road. The rear end of the facelifted Patrol is still a bit of a love it or hate it thing, although the Ti does still give you sequential rear indicators like the TIL, which is kind of cool. It doesn't get the electric tailgate, as I've already mentioned, so it's kind of heavy. And when you get in here, this is nowhere near as well packaged as in a 300 series Land Cruiser. I can't find Nissan's quote for the literage in this thing, but I can tell you now that having 8-seater with this back seat sloping up like that, and even under here, we've got this little sort of section, but it's only like so deep, and with the underslung spare underneath, this is not class leading for what it is. Does still have a 12-volt socket here, has a bunch of luggage tie down points, still has 3,500 kilos brake towing capacity like the Land Cruiser diesel does, but this is sort of kind of smaller than you'd expect for something as big as this. When the Y62 Patrol launched, it actually launched in left-hand drive form only in 2010, and then not in right-hand drive form until late 2012. So it probably explains why there's a separation now between the two interiors, because this is still the 2012 interior with a bit of embellishment, whereas the left-hand drive cars, as we discussed 2 years ago when we drove this Patrol in New Zealand, has a completely different center stack, has different screens. It has the drive mode moved to here, where it has this little sort of tray thing that I thought would be good for pistachio shells, but then I realized you can't pull it out, so you'd have to vacuum them out. That'd be a pain in the ass. And then it has a control thing in front here that controls the screens up there rather than having the dial up here. So this is very much of the late 2000s in design, and it has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 dials. So you kind of got to get your head around which one you should touch. But once you know where everything is, you sort of can operate it okay. Now this 8-inch touchscreen here is a complete anachronism. It's running through 6 speakers that are actually surprisingly decent, but it is not the 13 speaker stereo in the TIL. So if you're an audiophile, you're going to have to buy that model and maybe swap out the front bar so you've got a decent TI front bumper and a proper approach angle. Here it has no Apple CarPlay, no Android Auto. It has embedded nav, but whatever, I think you'd rather use it on your phone. We have 2 USB-A ports down here. You just Bluetooth your phone through it and run it as in you used to 10 years ago. So if that's okay by you, then that's fine. It's fine. It's just, come on, like, why doesn't it have the left-hand drive one? The rest of this stuff here, it has a CD player in here. All of these buttons here really are quite annoying. We do have tri-zone climate control. The Ti doesn't get the fan-cooled and heated front seats that the TIL gets, which are, if you remember, are those tiny little dials down here that barely anyone can see except for a very small rodent. We don't get a chilled glove box in here. This is just a regular bin here, which is quite deep, but also has switch blanks in there, no carpet in it. We also don't get a sunroof. You don't get seat memory for the driver. You don't get an electric steering column and electric mirror. Also with the memory, you don't get puddle lighting on the outside. But again, a lot of that stuff is just kind of unnecessary, I suppose. What this Ti also doesn't have is the more up-spec interior of the left-hand drive cars in terms of the trimming. Like, it doesn't have padding down the side here. It just has this sort of kind of gauche chrome. The steering wheel is very much the plain wheel. It doesn't have the stitching on the center boss here. It just has plain leather around the outside, although it is nice to hold and it is fine. I kind of like the matte black look of it. It very much links in with the grille at the front. It gives this a little bit more of a base model chic about it. Unfortunately, this brown wood stuff, which we've bitched about before and everyone hates, is just awful. Why isn't just even silver, like something from the 90s that's not that, or just black, piano black, please, anyone. It's just not happening. This here, 2 cup holders in here. We've got another little piccolo thing here, a 12 volt outlet here. The doors take, ironically, this coconut water, but on a side angle, not in the bit that they're meant to take, but they do kind of go in there. The instruments, again, huge analog dials, but very much of the 2000s. There is no digital speedo, and the speedo is actually quite a long way out. I was setting it on 125 on the freeway, which is 117 true, and that goes down as you go down the speed ranges. So if you set it at 90, it's only doing 82, 83, and so on and so forth. So at least it's optimistic and you're not unlikely to get booked, because that's kind of also not ideal in 2022. As for the driving position, you do sit really high in the Patrol. You feel significantly higher than you do in Land Cruiser 300 series. You're very much sitting on top of this Nissan rather than in the Toyota. But you kind of get used to it after a while. And once you sort of bond with the driving experience, this view is actually really quite great. And the seat itself, even though it's flat as, and doesn't have the ventilation of the TIL, which is still a bit of a pain, even with this perforation here, is actually, again, pretty good. And if you're a larger framed person, there's plenty of room to move sideways. As you would hope in a 4-drive that's almost 5.2 meters long, the second row in the Patrol is huge. I'm sitting behind myself here and I have an absolutely enormous amount of legroom. My tow room is so much that I'm not even underneath the front seat. I'm in air here. Like, we have a center tunnel here that really isn't that high. So even though this seating position here is a bit uncomfortable against the center armrest here, which, mind you, has a little small pair of cup holders in it, these outer seats are actually pretty good. The under thigh isn't too bad, considering that we're in a separate chassis 4-drive with a fairly high floor. I'm actually elevated and quite good. Like, great view, B-pillar grab handle. We've got ventilation in the ceiling here, controlled by the tri-zone climate here with its own digital climate stuff. We've got a pair of USB-A ports here and over here. There's a 12 volt outlet down the bottom. Matte pockets in both backs of the front seats, and just like the front doors, I can just squeeze this coconut water bottle into the cup holder. We also have proper door grabs, as all of the doors do. We have auto up-down windows which go all the way down, and all the doors have an extra fillet of the putrid wood grain from the front that no one wanted to see again, plus ruching in the leather along the doors here that isn't quite enough ruching to make it look like it's a deliberate design feature. It almost looks like it's a little bit badly built, although they are all consistent, so that's something. You don't get the rear seat entertainment in the Ti, but I don't think that's a problem. All the kids have their own devices, and it just frees up the look in here to make it really nice, because the room in this row in the Patrol is great. Now the USP of the Patrol Ti is that it seats 8 people, and there's 2 ways you can get in the back. You can grab the handle up here, or you can use the 7-position backrest adjuster here, pick it up, double flips, climb in, and we have 3 seats in here. So row 3 really isn't that bad. It's definitely for children because this seat is not going to fit 3 adults, although you could probably squeeze them in if they'd had a few drinks. This seat doesn't slide forward and back, but there's still a bit of toe room underneath, and these seats, when they move and they go in 7 positions like the backrest in the middle, sort of go from upright with a cushion here, and as you go back, the whole thing lowers itself down. And so it's actually surprisingly useful. There's air vents in the roof, we've got dual cup holders on both sides, and in terms of luggage space behind here, it's actually not too bad, although if that's what you really need when you're carrying 8 people, you just should buy a people mover. The combined fuel consumption figure for the Nissan Patrol Ti V8 is 14.4 litres per 100 kilometres, drinking 95 octane premium unleaded. However, we've averaged 15.1 litres per 100 kilometres, and that's with quite a lot of highway driving. So everyone will be very happy that this has a 140 litre tank because you're going to need it. The warranty for Nissan in Australia is 5 years or unlimited kilometres, whereas the recommended servicing for the Patrol is every 12 months or 10,000 kilometres. Over 5 years and 50,000 Ks, its cap price servicing is $3,216. Over the last 12 months, the median budget direct customer paid $1,121 to comprehensively insure a Nissan Patrol. However, everybody's situation is different and your premium will vary based on things insurers take into account, like where you live, your driving history, and whether you garage your Patrol. I think one of the things that people discredit about the Y62 Patrol is just how much technology is in this separate chassis four-wheel drive. And one of those things starts with the drivetrain. It's a 5.6 litre double overhead cam 32 valve petrol V8, which is not really what you would expect in a car like this tied to a 7-speed automatic, but as I'm about to show you, it's a ripper of a thing. Like, it is fast, it sounds great. First gear runs out at like 55 k's an hour, so it's not just about the torque of the engine, it's also about the gearing. And second gear runs to like 85. So third gear's your kind of go-to when you're using engine braking, but this is a really strong performing four-wheel drive, especially given the fact that it weighs sort of around 2750 kilos, which is fat. About 150 kilos fatter than a Land Cruiser 300 series. So thankfully, the Nissan 5.6 with 298 kilowatts at 5,800 RPM and 560 Newton meters at 4,000 RPM is strong as. Now, that torque figure is a little bit deceptive because 4,000 RPM doesn't really convey the fact that this engine actually has more than 90% of torque below 1,700 RPM. So that shows that it's not just the gearing, it's also the strength of the engine and the transmission itself. It doesn't really go into 7th gear until it's doing 80 k's an hour, and I suppose we've been averaging somewhere in the 15s, doing quite a lot of highway stuff and sort of 20 in the city. But given the fact that the Patrol is so tall, it's nearly 2 meters tall, it's the same height as the 300 series, it's nearly 2 meters wide, and it weighs 2.8 tons. So I think given all of that, I think it does a reasonably good job of trying to be efficient, even though it would be much better if it was a diesel in that respect. Now, there's also technology going on in the suspension. It has independent double wishbone front and rear with coil springs. It also has something that Nissan calls hydraulic body motion control, or something that sounds like a marketing wank for just having hydraulic dampers, but is actually the fact that it doesn't have any roll bars, and it had these hydraulic cushions built in to the shock absorbers to kind of control body motion. And for the most part, it does actually a pretty impressive job. When you first drive the Patrol on a freeway, and we're on a country road here that's quite lumpy and we are sort of lolling about a bit, but it doesn't really feel queasy. And I suppose initially on a freeway with a couple of little bumps here and there, it does have an element of queasiness, and certainly if you already feel queasy, it's going to exacerbate that, but it's really not as bad as people think. And once you start to get into it, this big, heavy four-wheel drive really controls its body motion quite well. It can go over big heaves and will haul itself up in one go. Not quickly, but just in a nice, calm and fluent fashion. Now, the steering is probably the weak link here. We have 3.6 turns lock to lock, 12.5 metre turning circle. So it's a bit of a wheel twirler, and it also has no weight and no feel. So we're just sitting here, we can do this and nothing really happens, which doesn't happen in a 300 series. It definitely moves around, whereas this is a bit of a old school Americana. But once you get used to how the chassis drives and just the general feeling of the Patrol's handling, it can be hustled quite quickly. It's actually got more point and more poise than you would give it credit for, providing the corners are fairly open and quick and not tightening radius ones or other sorts of corners that are just tight, because this size and this weight doesn't do tight very well. But you can drive it to its ability, and certainly you can turn ESC off and actually use the weight and the power of the Patrol to be really quite quick. This can be a deceptive point-to-point hauler, although you'll be using all 140 litres of that tank to do so. As for the quietness and the refinement of it, it's actually pretty good. It's really fine. You can do the country road speeds that people do in Australia, and the Patrol is actually quite quiet. Not that much wind noise. You've got a great vision, got a great view, got your nice seat that you're sitting in. You have that beautiful V8 to listen to while you're going at it, and it's just kind of more charming and more rewarding than anyone would really give it credit for. I suppose where it really starts to fall down a bit is just around the city. You do get used to it, but it is more cumbersome than a 300 series to drive around, and it just doesn't have the Land Cruiser's turn in or that sort of, I suppose, shrink wrapped kind of feel. You're very much on top of driving the Patrol. You're not inside it feeling like you're part of the vehicle like its main competitor. Well, not as much anyway. As for safety, you've got the Patrol's all-wheel drive system, which is full-time four-wheel drive. We have it in auto here, but you've also got 4 high, 4 low, a rear diff lock, ESC off, hill descent control, and we've got sand, snow, rock, and on-road mode. So we're in on-road. That's all well and good. It generally varies between 50-50 front and back and 100% to the back, but it does all of that itself. And with this update that came in 2020 with the Patrol, it really lifted its game safety-wise. We have forward AB with collision warning, we have blind spot monitoring, we have lane keep assist and lane departure warning, rear cross traffic alert, adaptive cruise control. Nothing majorly out of the ordinary, but still enough to keep this now 12-year-old vehicle relevant in 2022. The last time I drove the facelifted Patrol was in New Zealand a bit over 2 years ago, and on some really challenging roads, and it did struggle a little bit. So I kind of approached this 2022 Patrol Ti because it's so new that with a level of trepidation, thinking at least it's got a great engine. But it's actually a much better vehicle than that, as long as it's in the environment that it likes to be in, which in this case is bombing along off stuff off-road, driving along dirt roads, and absolutely hammering along country roads. The more that you throw at the suspension and this Patrol here, the better its ability. It's actually really quite a decent country road four-wheel drive. It's just not very good on tightening radius corners or in really tight roads and a bunch of stuff like that, and it's certainly not economical in the city. So if you're buying this 8-seat Patrol Ti here, because it has 8 seats, you should really be thinking about buying a people mover instead, because it's a much more efficient vehicle with probably a lot better luggage space than what we have to offer here. But if you're using the Patrol for what it's good at, which is towing and doing what I just said, hammering along country Australia, then this at just under $90,000 drive away is actually surprisingly good value. It actually gives you so much metal for the money and makes the Land Cruiser look rather expensive and unobtainable. If you haven't subscribed, please do so below the video. Hit the notification bell and tell us what you think about chasing cars, but in particular, what you think about the Nissan Patrol Ti, the fact that it's still a Patrol V8, and whether you think it should be still on our roads or it's something that you actually aspire to, which you could.